How is everybody doing? Strength Chat episode 88, and today I've got a very special guest for you. Today I am joined by a published author. He's also been an international competitive bodybuilder, as well as a coach and education coordinator at JPS Health and Fitness. Today I am joined by Martin Refalo. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, man. Very privileged to be here. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely awesome. So what's been going on in your world? What have you been up to, working on recently? What's been happening?
Well, at the moment, I'm actually doing a master's in applied sports science. So that's been taking up a lot of my time, along with my coaching duties as well. So I do a lot of face-to-face coaching, and I have many online clients which I have to attend to as well. So yeah, like I've been focusing on my coaching, trying to balance that out with uni as well. Getting a lot closer to finishing my degree now. So I will be finished in the coming months, which is good. Once I complete my thesis, which is my next big project. So that's gonna again take up a lot of my time. But I'm really looking forward to what's to come. And besides that in coaching, not much else. That pretty much makes up most of my life right now. So yeah, man, like it definitely keeps me busy, and I love what I do. So yeah, very privileged to be here to talk about my passion, I guess. So yeah, man.
Yeah, awesome. So what's the plan after your masters then? Is it to take a little bit of a time off? Obviously, you're quite busy at the time, or what's the plan after that?
Well, my original plan was to do a PhD. That's where I want to take my career. I want to take it, towards the academic side of things, and obviously maintain my coaching as well. But I do think I'm probably going to need a bit of a break from studying and potentially resume, studying down the track. So yeah, my goal after doing my masters, or my focus, I guess, after doing my masters is to continue coaching and build up my client base, make sure my clients get really good results, and try to focus on my own training and my own goals a little more as well, because that obviously takes a little bit of a hit when your workload is quite high. So I do want to compete in bodybuilding again in the coming years, and that obviously takes a lot of time and big time commitment. And I do want to put a bit more effort into my own goals next year, and hopefully get into a PhD down the track. Like I said, I do want to work in academia, and I also currently teach at a university as well. So that's kind of my side hustle, so to speak. I teach human physiology at the uni that I do my degree at. So I do want to do a bit more of that down the track as well. And obviously there's only so much I can do, and the PhD will probably have to wait. But that's where my career is heading at the moment.
A lot of things to keep you out of trouble then. There's a lot of things there to keep you busy.
Definitely. I've got no problem staying busy, man. That's for sure.
Good. So for everyone listening who might not know your background and how you got involved in coaching and bodybuilding and all that sort of stuff, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I got into personal training as soon as I finished school. That was the passion that I kind of had established as a teenager, training in the gym, pretty much every day, doing the good old bro splits. I got straight into personal training, and I worked at a commercial gym for a couple of years. And from then I, found out about JPS, so about 3 years ago now. And the funny story that Jacob always tells people is that I was teeing up between doing the mentorship course, which JPS was offering, and the kettlebell course. And at the time, I thought the kettlebell course was the way to go. But thankfully, I chose the mentorship route, and here I am now. Along the way, I did my bachelor's degree in exercise science as well. So I was introduced to the science and the evidence-based fitness scene about 3 years ago. Once I had heard about JPS and I was doing all the sciencey stuff at uni. And that was what kind of instigated my passion for evidence-based training and nutrition. And since then, I have competed in bodybuilding. So I've competed bodybuilding twice. And that's always been the underlying reason why I got into the fitness industry too. Like, as I said, I was training in the gym as a teenager. I used to love bodybuilding back then, and that kind of, pushed me along. So I competed in 2016 as a junior, and that competition preparation is something that I'm trying to forget because it wasn't a very well planned out preparation, a 12 to 14 week prep, which was quite rigid and it's quite tough, to say the least. And then I got the opportunity to compete again the year after, in 2017, with Jacob coaching me along. And that was a pretty successful year of bodybuilding. So again, I was competing in the juniors, and I actually got the opportunity to compete in Bali in the Worlds competition, so ICN Worlds. And that was really cool. So it was good to go through a contest preparation that was strategically planned out, that wasn't as rigid and as, extreme as the first contest prep that I undertook. Obviously, it was still hard and it had its moments. That's part and parcel of the contest preparation that I think I did a pretty good job at handling myself along the way. And yeah, like my next goal, I guess, is compete in hopefully 2022.
Yeah.
But as I said, it's a long-term thing. You've got to play the long game if you want to be a really good bodybuilder. So, I'm committed to the long term, and I obviously need to put a bit more work into my off season before I can step on stage again. But that pretty much summarizes, everything that I've kind of accomplished in the fitness industry. I have authored a book, so alongside Jacob, a nutrition ebook, which is out online, which was pretty cool too. And hopefully I get the opportunity to do something like that again in the future once, university settles down a little bit. But yeah, man, that pretty much summarizes my background.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, when you mentioned in there about the prep for bodybuilding, I compete in powerlifting myself, and I think sometimes any prep leading up to a competition or anything like that, I think it's not always a bad thing to make those mistakes or follow plans that didn't work so well, because when it comes full circle and you come round again, you can learn from those mistakes a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
You also mentioned that.
Yep.
Say again, sorry.
So, yeah, I did say that I wanted to forget the 2016 prep, but it was definitely a learning experience, and I don't regret doing it because I wouldn't have learned, I wouldn't be where I am now without it, because I think it did make me stronger. And yeah, man, like you said, it's important to use those experiences as kind of a learning curve and make sure that they make you stronger, and the next time you do undertake, a similar experience, you do a better job of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that you mentioned there is once you started working with Jacob, who was coaching you, obviously he managed you a lot better than the first prep, and I think there was actually why obviously I got in contact with you after speaking with Jacob as well. I think it's actually on YouTube. You did a chat on stress, and at the minute, it's quite. I quite like to do topics that people have chatted with me in the gym about, and the big one is stress. And as a coach, you've got to be able to manage your clients and make sure that it's not getting on top of them a little bit. But I also think stress is sometimes a misunderstood sort of topic. People don't really know, say, I'm stressed, but they don't really know how it can impact their training. So do you just want to give, before we sort of dive into this topic, actually what is stress and the difference between sort of workout stress and life stress, if you like?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, defining terms before we actually discuss them is important. So a broad definition of stress is just a stimulus that has the ability to threaten homeostasis. So it could be a situation, scenario, event that you face on a daily basis that changes the internal environment. So remember, homeostasis is your body's ability to maintain a stable internal environment. So the stressor needs to alter what is occurring internally on a physiological or biochemical level. So what we also need to understand is that homeostasis doesn't work on a whole body level. It's very specific to physiological systems within the body. So the stressor might disrupt homeostasis on a cardiovascular level. So we may have an increase in heart rate, an increase in blood pressure, increase in blood flow. On a respiratory level, we may have an increase in respiratory rate. In the digestive system, we may have the slowing down of digestion. So these are just some examples of disruptions in homeostasis that can occur due to a stressor being imposed on the body. Now, what we also need to understand is that stress is highly determined by our perception. Okay, so we can have real stresses just like resistance training is. So resistance training directly induces micro trauma on the muscles and causes a stress response from the body. However, many of the stresses that our clients and just people in general face on a day-to-day basis are perceived stresses.
Yeah.
For example, when you burn your toast in the morning, that's a situation that doesn't have to leave you stressed. But a lot of individuals actually get worked up and cause a stress response internally. So again, that exemplifies the importance of perception when it comes to stress. The only reason they are stressed in that case is because they have perceived that situation as stressful. Okay, so there's a clear difference between a real stressor like resistance training and perceived stresses, which make up a majority of the stresses that our clients face on a day-to-day basis. Now, the thing is, your body doesn't actually differentiate stress, or it's not very good at differentiating stress. So it doesn't know whether you've burnt your toast or whether you are running away from a tiger like our ancestors did thousands of years ago, right?
Yeah.
What it does is it just responds to that stress by increasing the secretion of certain hormones within the body, changing what is occurring biochemically. And like I said, it's the same response, whether you burn your toast or whether you are facing a life-threatening danger. The only thing that differs is the magnitude of that response. So obviously, when we are facing the life-threatening danger, the magnitude of that hormone secretion is going to be higher. There is going to be greater changes occurring into our internal environment, as opposed to a minor acute stressor like burning your toast. So it is important to understand, like some takeaways from that, that stress, broadly is just a disruption to homeostasis that can occur on many different physiological levels within the body. It is also highly determined by perception, and there is a clear difference between a real stressor and a perceived stressor.
Yeah. So on there, obviously, you mentioned about sort of the physiology side of things, but also if it's a perceived stress, I can imagine that that's more sort of a psychological element on that. So can people be more stressed than others, and is there necessarily a reason behind that? Because I've had clients that come into the gym who, they'd be lying down if they were any more laid back. Nothing seems to really faze them. Whereas other people, like you say, burning your toast in the morning can feel as though that's a really stressful thing. Have you found that any reasoning behind why people are more stressed than others, or?
Well, not exactly, but people do seem to exhibit different tolerances to stress. So some individuals can definitely tolerate more stress than others can. And the reason behind this, I don't actually know. Research in this area is quite limited. It could potentially be a genetic factor, or it could be just that the individual has actually worked their tolerance to stress up over time. Now, what we also need to understand is that as humans, we are psychosomatic individuals. So psycho meaning mind, somatic meaning body. Those two kind of components are interrelated and they cannot be kind of separated. So psychological stress can definitely manifest as physical stress and vice versa. Now, some individuals are just more prone to facing psychological stress, like their perception of stress is, I guess, greater than some other individuals. So, one person may burn their toast and perceive that as stressful and cause a stress response, whereas others may be able to kind of look beyond that, step away from the fact that they've just burnt their toast and they don't actually induce a stress response. So yeah, the underlying reasons behind that, I'm not actually sure, but that is definitely something that I have anecdotally, I guess, viewed amongst my clients as well. It is quite an interesting topic. which I'd love to see more research on.
Yeah.
But for now, I can definitely say that there does seem to be varying tolerances to stress that people tend to exhibit.
Yeah, I'm quite glad that you mentioned that there, because I've spoken to some clients, and they've actually asked me that question. Why is it some people are more stressed than others? And I'm quite glad that I'm not far off the page, like if you've said there as well. Research, we don't know why, which is sometimes the case, but 100%, especially the past few conversations that I've had with clients about stress. I think it is an interesting topic, and I think if you can get on top of it and manage it a little bit better, you will be able to see a little bit better results. Just going back to sort of the physiology side of things, a couple of things you've mentioned there about how you perceive stress and situations and that sort of stuff. What about sort of external factors such as lack of sleep and nutrition? Does that have an effect on stress as well?
Yeah, for sure. Now, I think before we get into that, we kind of just have to establish a physiological base understanding of like stress and how it actually manifests in the body. And like I said, it's definitely highly determined by perception, and that kind of stems from our central nervous system, right? From our brain, the hypothalamus, which kind of receives these stimuli and determines whether or not they are stressful. So it's important to know that, yes, we have the central nervous system. We have a component of the central nervous system, which is the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system takes control of involuntary actions, like our heartbeat. We don't really think about a heartbeat. It's under autonomic control. Now, if we break that down even further, we have two divisions of the autonomic nervous system. So we have the parasympathetic division and the sympathetic division. Now, a lot of people have probably heard of the sympathetic nervous system as being the fight or flight response, and it definitely is. So, when we face a stressor, we get this increase in sympathetic activity. And what occurs is there is a release of two specific hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline. And when these hormones get released, there are various processes that occur in the body. For example, an increase in heart rate, increase in blood pressure, slowing down of digestion, increase in blood flow to working muscles, increase in sweat gland activity, and all these processes are occurring in the body to keep you alive. That's the main goal, is to protect you from the stressor, because remember, your body doesn't know whether you've burnt toast or whether you're running away from a tiger, right? So it does its best to protect you in that case. Then we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest or digest mode. And this is where a lot of people probably need to be spending more time. Definitely a lot of our clients need to be spending more time in a parasympathetic state. And it's important to find a good balance between both of those states. And a lot of people in this day and age are highly sympathetic throughout the day. And like I said, just don't spend enough time being parasympathetic. And that's where sleep comes into play. And that's definitely something we can touch on soon. But what we also need to understand when it comes to stress physiology, and this has major implications for muscle growth and fat loss, is that we can also have the activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, so the HPA axis. Okay. Now, what happens here is, if we face a stressor that is severe enough, we can get the activation of this HPA axis, like I said, and this is where we get the release of cortisol. Okay, so we've all heard of cortisol being the stress hormone. Many people think it's a bad hormone, but it isn't. Every hormone in the body has its place, and if cortisol wasn't present within the body, we wouldn't be functioning optimally, and we'd probably be dead. So we can't really call cortisol a bad hormone. Yeah. And it's not exclusively a stress hormone either, because it is actually elevated when stress isn't present too. Okay, stress is just a component of cortisol. So what we need to understand is that cortisol has many roles within the body. It's a glucocorticoid, which means it regulates blood glucose metabolism. It also plays a role in immune system function and has some catabolic effects and potentially some anabolic effects as well, which may be undesirable from a body composition standpoint. So for example, lipogenesis, which is the increase in fat within the body, which we can get to soon. Now, what happens is when cortisol gets elevated in response to a stressor, That's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, again, that's just your body's response to an acute stress. And what generally happens is we see this increase in cortisol, we see this increase in sympathetic activity, which tends to decline quite rapidly as well. And that's a healthy response to stress. Okay, that's totally fine. Your body is well equipped at handling acute stresses because it's handled many stresses in the past that are a lot more severe than burning your toast, for example.
Yeah.
But the problem lies in individuals who are chronically stressed. Okay, so there is a big difference between acute stress and chronic stress. So when we are chronically stressed, and chronic stress can manifest from a variety of reasons. Sometimes unfortunate circumstances take place which lead to chronic stress. Okay, we can't do anything about that. In many cases, though, acute stresses can actually accumulate over time. And if an individual keeps exhibiting a stress response from all these acute stresses, that can manifest into chronic stress. And like I said, this is a problem because when we are chronically stressed, we have a chronic elevation in sympathetic activity. And not only that, we get a chronic elevation in cortisol. And cortisol, you know, it's got positive effects, it's got negative effects, and it exerts these effects based on how it is regulated throughout the day. Okay, so if cortisol circadian rhythm is normal, then it's going to exert its effects appropriately throughout the body. However, if baseline cortisol levels are chronically elevated, then there may be some undesirable effects being exerted. Not to mention, when cortisol baseline levels are elevated, your cortisol response to acute stresses is also blunted. Okay, so because cortisol levels are already so high, when you face an acute stressor, the cortisol doesn't respond appropriately. And from a health standpoint, this is not desirable. Also, if we do, for some reason, get an increase in cortisol, okay, so an even higher increase now because it's already so high, it's above baseline, and cortisol levels actually take longer to return back to pre-stress levels. So you start running into all these problems when you are chronically stressed that have major complications for health and for body composition, whether it be muscle growth and whether it be fat loss.
Yeah.
Now, this is where sleep comes into play. So chronic stress has the potential to impact your sleep. And one of the reasons is cortisol's, one of cortisol's main roles in the body is to regulate our wake to sleep cycle. Okay. So generally cortisol will rise in the morning at about the time we usually wake up. It increases heart rate, increases blood pressure, increases arousal to transition us into a awakening state. And it generally decreases as we get closer to bedtime so that we can actually fall asleep. Now, if cortisol levels are elevated chronically, then there is obviously going to be some implications when it comes to sleep, right? Or complications when it comes to our sleep. So what people tend to experience when they are chronically stressed is sleep disturbances, an inability to actually fall asleep, waking up throughout the night. And when you are sleep deprived, generally what happens is your perception of stress increases, right? Like I've experienced that before. You probably have, many of our clients have. If you are sleep deprived, then there is a higher chance of you getting pissed off at burning your toast, right?
Absolutely.
And what happens is these individuals start falling into this vicious cycle of being chronically stressed, then having a lack of sleep, and chronically stressed again, lack of sleep. And it's just a vicious cycle that is quite hard to kind of recover from. Definitely possible to.
Yeah.
It's definitely possible to recover from. But it can have, like I said, many complications, not only from a body composition standpoint, but also from a health standpoint, which is crucial for many of our clients. Many of our clients come in to feel better about themselves, to feel healthy. And if they are going through periods of chronic stress and sleep deprivation, then stress management strategies need to take precedence sometimes over optimal training and nutrition programs. Like, a client can still continue training throughout these periods, but there definitely needs to be some changes to training program prescription and nutrition prescription or nutritional interventions to account for the chronic stress and the lack of sleep that our clients are actually facing. So yeah, does that make sense?
Absolutely, I thought that was a really good explanation, and you know, I know from my point of view, listening to that explanation there of you know, you can see people building up those stresses, and like you said, I've had that before, you know, where stress is building up, and
Yep,
then your sleep starts getting
100%.
affected,
Yep.
and you know, probably people listening have heard that as well, and as a from a coach's point of view, to see that happening, and then you know the next
Hmm.
thing you're thinking, oh, you know, I hope it doesn't start affecting the sleep. And then as soon as their sleep starts getting affected, then everything
Yep.
else gets thrown out of the window. I always say
Yep.
to, you know, the
Yep.
clients that I work with, you know, there's a reason why sleep is a form of torture. As soon as sleep goes out of the window, you know, it has
Hmm.
a massive effect on everything. And as well, on
100%.
the flip side of that, when people have that build up of stress, you've probably had it with some of your clients as well. They'll just go on a massive blowout, or you know, they'll something relatively small they can get really, you know, upset about, or something like that. And that's why, you know, out of everything that you've spoken about there, actually the physiological effects of stress, I think people just think, or there seems to be uh, a culture at the minute of, oh well, I won't chat about what's stressing, I won't chat about it, or I won't try and rectify it, that you know, you can still train or
No,
come
you
into the
need
gym
to.
and
Yes.
get on top of it. Whereas actually, really, exactly what you said there, and you know, I'm sure we'll get into it, you know, as we progress through the chat. You know, that there are strategies that you need to put in place, and as well, you know, that sometimes from an actual health point of view, because you know, people will come in and they'll want to do powerlifting, or you know, bodybuilding, or strongman, or they're an athlete,
Mhm.
but you need to be a human, and a healthy human first, before you start doing, you know,
That's right.
all
Yep.
the good things.
100%.
So there's no
Yep.
reason why, you know, take a step back from training, and then we can start. Then, you know, once stress levels are down,
Hmm.
then we can go back.
Yeah,
You mentioned
for sure.
throughout that explanation of you know, the impact that stress can have on muscle growth and fat loss. Which one do you want to tackle first?
Maybe we can talk about muscle growth first,
Yeah,
and then we'll move into fat loss and the nutrition side of things.
yeah,
So when we're talking about stress and like just training in general, it's good to explain or understand the general adaptation syndrome. So it's a fairly neat way of explaining, you know, stress and resistance training and whatnot. So the general adaptation syndrome, or gas model, was developed by Hans Salio many years ago, and it exemplifies the body's need to recover from a stressor before it can actually induce the desired adaptation.
yeah,
Okay, so there are four components to the gas model. So we've got homeostasis, which is our baseline. We've got the alarm stage, the resistance stage, and the exhaustion stage. So obviously, you know, we're at homeostasis. When we train with weight, we impose this stress on the body, and we dip below homeostasis. There's a disruption in homeostasis, so to speak, which the body needs to recover from before it can make the desired adaptations, right? Now, obviously, the harder you train, the greater that disruption in homeostasis. And I like to term it a recovery hole. So when you train, you dig this recovery hole, which you need to climb out of before your body can make adaptations, right? Now, when you are chronically stressed, you are chronically digging this recovery hole, even if you aren't training. Okay, so remember the gas model. It assumes that all external factors are kept constant, and that's one of the limitations of it. Okay, it only takes into account like training, for example. Like if we're talking about training, that's all it takes into account. But in practice, clients have a multitude of external stresses affecting their ability to recover from training, right? And as coaches, when we implement a training program and we are prescribing this training program to our clients, we are dropping all this training stress on top of all the other life and external stress that our clients are facing. And a lot of coaches seem to disregard that.
yeah,
And it's quite disappointing to see,
yeah,
because many of the clients that we train have so much shit going on in their lives
yeah,
that is going to impact their training. And, no wonder people hit plateaus and start spinning their wheels, right?
Yeah.
So, think about it this way. Imagine that you have an individual who's chronically stressed, who's digging this recovery hole, right? Adding training stress on top of that means they're digging an even deeper hole. And that means they need to climb a lot further to make their way out of the hole before their body can actually start inducing these adaptations. So I think, if you do have a client who is experiencing, chronic stress, training program design becomes increasingly important. And like you said, there is nothing wrong with taking a step back, because at that point, if you continue to add in training stress, you make your way to the exhaustion stage of the gas model, where you're not making any adaptations and you're probably only taking steps back. That's what causes burnout, not only physically but psychologically, and you'll end up not seeing the client anymore because they'll get fed up of not making any progress and feeling like shit.
Yeah.
So, taking a step back, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's not necessarily taking a conservative approach. So, when you confront clients with a training program that is like lower volume and it doesn't incorporate as much work as they're used to, they kind of think of it as taking a conservative approach. But if they are chronically stressed, then it's not actually taking a conservative approach. You're actually taking them closer to what is optimal for them at that point in time.
Yeah.
Okay, it may not be optimal if there was no chronic stress lingering around, fair enough. But at this point in time, the client is chronically stressed. So doing, for example, just like a arbitrary term here, doing 30 sets of whatever a week, may not be optimal. Optimal may be 15 sets a week at this point. Okay, if that chronic stress wasn't there, then maybe 30 sets would be the way to go. But it's important to teach clients the importance of taking a step back and adjusting expectations if there is just so much stress, occurring and lingering in their lives, because, like I said, your body is going to struggle to make adaptations to training if it's not recovering.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the main training principles, right? We need to make sure we manage fatigue to ensure we don't run into those problems, because if we continue to fight against the body's need to recover from our training, so we continue adding in training stress, what's going to happen to our performance in the gym? So now not only are we struggling to recover from our training, but we're accumulating more fatigue, running into performance issues. So now we are also limiting our ability to provide an overloading stimulus, a stimulus that is sufficient for hypertrophy in the gym. And we start spinning our wheels. This is where individuals stop making progress on a week-to-week basis, start feeling demotivated and not really wanting to train, because if you're not making any progress, well, like, what's the point, right?
Yeah.
That's why clients come hire a coach. They hire a coach to make progress. That unfortunately, lots of coaches, like I said, disregard chronic stress and keep adding in training volume, and the client not only runs into recovery issues but also starts running into these performance issues. And if you're not progressively overloading your training in the long run, and you're not recovering from your training, well, that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So that's how stress can impact muscle growth.
Yeah.
And like I said, chronic stress leads to sleep deprivation, or can lead to sleep deprivation. And it is well documented in the literature that a lack of sleep can affect your ability to build muscle. So not only affect your ability to synthesize, muscle proteins, but it can also affect your ability to retain muscle in a dieting phase, right? Which has implications for fat loss, because when you're trying to lose fat, you also want to retain muscle.
Yeah.
And man, like I said, that vicious cycle of chronic stress and lack of sleep can lead to many, many drawbacks. And it is important that stress management takes precedence at that point, like I mentioned earlier. So, when I do get a client, who is in that state, most of my sessions are just me talking to them about their stress and trying to work out strategies to reduce it. And, we're never going to be able to reduce all of our clients' stress. That's just something that we have to accept. But we can definitely mitigate the impact stress can have on our training by adjusting the training program and implementing stress management strategies.
Absolutely. A key point that I picked out there was at this moment in time, training is going to take a step back a little bit. And you mentioned there about, you might be doing 30 sets a week, but you might end up dropping it down. What I quite like using is, I think it was Mike Isutella, the sort of like the minimum effective volume that you can use, and all that sort of stuff. Everyone thinks that, especially probably more so when it comes to muscle building, that they need to get in the gym and, I'm not putting muscle on, so I need to do more. I'm still not putting muscle on. I need to do more again. Whereas actually just taking that step back a little bit. And again, that key statement there, at this moment in time, we're just going to dial things back a little bit. There'll be times when people can, when stress is going to be really low, and you can put a lot of effort into building muscle. But sometimes, and what from speaking with coaches such as yourself, that I want people to get the point across that sometimes it isn't actually the training program. Sometimes it's the external things, sleep, nutrition, and all that sort of stuff that'll help with that. Especially for muscle growth. In terms of for fat loss, then, what's the sort of, how does that differ compared to the effects that it has, stress has on muscle growth? So obviously you mentioned there about not recovering as much. So in terms of fat loss, how does stress have an impact on fat loss?
Well, with fat loss, it's not as clear cut as muscle growth. And, I mentioned that the two main issues are recovery and your ability to perform well. With fat loss, there seems to be a multitude of factors that can impact your ability to lose fat, right? If that is the goal, and if you are undergoing, a dieting intervention. So one of the main ones is the hunger-related effects of stress. So the research on this is quite limited, but there does seem to be an impact on hunger. So, for example, acute stresses typically tend to suppress hunger. Okay, now this will not be the same for every individual. Like I said, there is a lot of inter-individual variability in regards to these responses, but typically that's what we see, and research shows that. I see that in my clients too. Now, with chronic stress, what tends to happen here is there seems to be an increase in appetite. Okay, so there seems to be an increased need to eat high palatability foods. So foods that are very energy dense, like high fat, high carbohydrate foods. And this is obviously a problem if an individual is trying to adhere to a calorie deficit. Yeah. So chronic stress, one way it can impact fat loss is by increasing hunger. Now, we also mentioned that sleep can be affected when you are chronically stressed. And there is a lot of research that also shows sleep can have an impact on hunger. So again, when it comes to a dieting intervention, hunger is one of the main limitations, right? So if chronic stress and a lack of sleep are affecting your hunger, well, you're going to have a hard time adhering to a diet. Okay, at the end of the day, we need to be able to maintain a calorie deficit. And if chronic stress, potentially due to cortisol, is increasing our hunger and limiting our ability to hold that deficit, then we're not going to make any progress. Lack of sleep can also lead to a reduction in energy expenditure. And when you are chronically stressed as well, you are less likely to move more. That's just something that I've anecdotally witnessed. I'm not sure if there is much evidence on that. What I can say though is chronic stress can actually increase your perception of fatigue. Okay, and if your perception of fatigue is increased, then you are probably less likely to move. Mm-hmm. And again, your performance in the gym is probably going to be diminished, okay, because you're going to be hitting that fatigue point in a set a lot earlier if your perception of fatigue is slightly skewed. And that's, again, going to limit your ability to build muscle. But yeah, when it comes to fat loss, like I said, it's not as clear cut. It's just that chronic stress tends to increase hunger, has potential impact on your energy expenditure. And we know that, energy input and energy output are two, I guess, major players when it comes to trying to create this calorie deficit. So if both sides of the equation there are being affected by stress and potentially a lack of sleep, well, like I said, the client is gonna find it very hard to maintain a calorie deficit. Now, what we also need to understand that the calorie deficit itself can be a stress to the client. Okay, again, this is not going to happen with all clients, but for many clients, when you prescribe them with this dieting intervention, that's a stress. So psychologically, and potentially physically as well. And like I said, psychological stress can manifest as physical stress and vice versa. So that's something we need to take into account too. And if a client is chronically stressed, then I'm not even sure if they should be dieting. I'm not sure if their goals should be fat loss, because it's so hard. And what is the point of trying to endure a calorie deficit if you're struggling due to chronic stress and, you keep going off plan and you start spinning your wheels, and really, most clients just end up going nowhere if you keep pushing fat loss when they are chronically stressed. So it's important to realize when clients need to step away from fat loss, from their fat loss goals, and potentially undergo a maintenance period where their goal is to maintain their body weight and obviously manage their stress, right? And once stress is managed and dissipated to some degree, then you can return to a fat loss phase. And yeah, I think that's where, again, a lot of coaches and just people who kind of go about things on their own and coach themselves, that's where they go wrong. If you are chronically stressed, you need to accept that, and you need to accept that your main goal at this point is to reduce that stress, because you're gonna find it really hard to maintain a calorie deficit. You're gonna find it really hard to retain muscle throughout that period as well, which is a major factor that we need to take into account when dieting. Like, a client could lose 5 kilos of scale weight, but if they lost 4 kilos of muscle, they wouldn't look any better. Yeah. So, when we are dieting, for me anyway, muscle retention is something that I definitely take into account, and it's of utmost importance, because I know that if my clients hold all their muscle, well, their body composition is going to look a lot better, even if they don't lose much fat, right? So, like adjusting expectations, I guess that's what it comes down to. And so many clients struggle to adjust expectations. And that's where, you as a coach need to come in and have that hard chat. And that hard chat is, it's definitely hard to have in some cases, but man, it's for not only the best, like it will not only leave the client better off, but it's also going to leave you better off. Because remember, you are providing a service, and if the client isn't happy with your service, if they want to lose fat, but they're not losing fat, and it's because you are continuing to push something that their life just isn't conducive to right now, well, at the end of the day, you're not providing the service that they're after, right? So potentially persuading them to partake in a maintenance phase and partake in stress management strategies is actually going to benefit the both of you. So they're going to feel a lot better. They're going to be healthier, and you're actually going to be providing your service if you are good enough at persuading them, the right way, and persuading them away from fat loss. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back to again that point that you said in the last little bit that we were chatting about. That at this moment in time, right, we're going to concentrate on something else. It's funny. I had an assessment with a client, and it was either yesterday or the day before, and basically, it's an exam period for her. So she was trying to get a little bit stronger, and fat was actually going up. It wasn't just staying the same. Fat was actually going up. Obviously, a really stressful period for her. So actually, just a sit down chat and be like, look, right now we can't really work towards those goals. So we're going to dial back training. Exactly what you mentioned about, if you're doing 30 sets a week, right, we're going to drop that down to 15. We're going to take a step back from potentially some of the barbell work that we're doing, use a little bit of a lighter load, and then we're going to go towards actually just implementing some stress management strategies that will ultimately help them work towards their goals. I think it's really key in terms of having that conversation, exactly what you've said, and managing those expectations. Because if you don't manage those expectations and have that chat with your clients, ultimately, exactly what you said, you're doing a little bit of a disservice to them. And as well, for fat loss, you mentioned there that there'll be times when if you are trying to put them on a calorie deficit and like, look, we want to try and drop fat down, that they can just absolutely just fall off the wagon and just go on a massive binge or go off the rails a little bit, which really you never want to happen, because when they come back from having that binge, the stress is higher because they feel stressed because they've had that binge, which that's what you don't want. So as a coach, and from the programming side of things, how would you, just go into a little bit more detail on how would you change the programming around from a muscle and a fat loss point of view? Is there any strategies that you implement from a programming point of view if stress is really high?
Yeah, so let's say that the goal isn't fat loss. Let's say I've persuaded the client to take in a maintenance period, but obviously they want to continue training. We still want to build muscle. I know it's not going to be optimal muscle growth, but that's still the goal. Like I said earlier, I'd probably elect to reduce training volume, potentially even training frequency. So if a client is training 4 times a week and they're chronically stressed, I'm fine with dropping 1 training day, getting them to go for a walk, potentially do some light cardio, or partake in an activity like yoga, meditation, something other than resistance training. So, potentially we could term this an active rest day, just to kind of show the client that they still got to do something, but it's just not going to be resistance training. I think, the reduction in training frequency can go a long way. And like I said, a slight drop in training volume, potentially a change in exercise selection as well. So utilizing exercises that don't come with a high degree of discomfort. And this is important because, like I said, if an individual is chronically stressed, their perception of fatigue is higher. And it's fair to say that their perception of discomfort is probably going to be higher as well. So what I mean by this is, if you're doing an exercise that is highly discomforting, it is highly likely that the client is going to stop that set short because they are feeling discomfort and they are feeling an increased amount of fatigue, right? And they're stopping that set short and they're not reaching the point where they're going to be achieving or acquiring a hypertrophic stimulus from that set, okay? Because remember, we need to reach the point of true muscle fatigue, or at least close to true muscle fatigue, to ensure that the set is actually going to provide us with the hypertrophic stimulus. And if you're choosing exercises that are highly discomforting and that come with a large fatigue cost, and remember, everything you do in the gym comes with a fatigue cost, but some exercises come with a high cardiovascular demand, a high respiratory demand, a large amount of joint stress, right? And just overall just come with a large fatigue cost. These exercises are going to reduce the client's ability to actually complete a set, and more importantly, complete an effective set. Okay, so I think exercise selection is super important as well. And when it comes to just trying to improve recovery and just trying to dissipate fatigue, some clients feel as if they need to go out and do a lot of meditation or do a lot of this or do a lot of that. In most cases, they just need to do less. Doing less work is going to reduce that fatigue cost, which you are acquiring, and is going to help you recover from your training, right? And if you're recovering from your training, even if it's less training, well, you're probably going to make better adaptations than if you were doing more work and not recovering from it.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand that, like I said earlier, doing less work is not being conservative. It's probably optimal at this point. So beyond those slight changes in training frequency and training volume and the implementation of like an active rest day, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything else that I would implement. But based off experience, that's what I found has worked for my clients. And even just sustaining that for a few weeks while we focus on maintenance can drastically help with their stress management. So you'll see it in your clients straight away. As soon as you drop training volume, you start choosing exercises that are more conducive to their current state of perception, and man, it pays off. Like, if you've never tried it before with a client, if you've always added more training volume and always push your clients on a week-to-week basis, yes, I understand you may be hesitant dropping training volume, but it definitely pays off. Because if we think about training volume as well, it's an inverted U, right? So we have a dose response. So training volume has a dose response effect on hypertrophy only up to a certain point. Beyond that point, we start seeing detrimental effects, right? And you may be on the kind of the wrong side of the slope if you are chronically stressed, even if you aren't doing much work because you're not recovering from it. So pulling your training volume back will actually take you back up to the top of that inverted U where things seem to be optimal, and you're going to get better results.
Yeah, it's a little bit like what we mentioned before. I think there is a culture of more equals better. We need to do more. We need to do more. But yeah, absolutely. Taking the foot off the gas a little bit is can be really important. And as well, I've said this and exactly what you've said on there in terms of recovery. Recovery is really, really important. If you're not recovering, you're not going to be able to. You're not going to. Well, nothing's going to happen. You're just going to stay in that same point all the time. Just on the point of, you mentioned there that people get involved in yoga or meditation or something like that, as well as potentially dropping the training down. I've had a few people that say, "Oh, breathing and yoga and meditation isn't for me." Some people, like you mentioned, will have an active recovery day and go for a walk. Other people seem as though if they're really, really stressed, they need to release that stress. So they'll get involved in boxing, and want to knock hell out of a bag. I've always been a little bit of, if it's going to reduce your stress, give that a go. What are your thoughts on, obviously with boxing being, hitting bags or pad work or sparring, is that actually effective for reducing stress, or is that just sort of a myth?
So the way I see it is, if an activity is going to help a client feel better, then go for it. I don't care if it's boxing. I don't care if technically, physiologically, that's going to induce a stress response. Remember, I mentioned as humans, we are psychosomatic. So psychology affects our physiology. Yeah. If you do a boxing session and you feel better after it, well, that's fine by me. Your psychological state has improved, and potentially your physiological state as well, right? So I don't mind clients doing a boxing session, once a week to help improve stress. Yeah. I don't mind them doing yoga. I don't mind them doing meditation. I think those forms of stress management can increase mindfulness and increase awareness, and that can help shift their perception. So I don't think meditation and yoga have a direct effect on stress, and these activities aren't directly reducing stress, because they can improve mindfulness, and the client's perception of stress may be altered in a positive manner. So, when they burn their toast in the morning, they may not get pissed off, like I mentioned earlier. Yeah. And in the long run, that can benefit their client. So that's definitely something that if a client is facing chronic stress, I promote, meditation. I promote doing yoga once a week. If I know the client comes from a boxing background, well, go and smash, the boxing bag for half an hour. If that makes you feel better, as long as they're obviously not overdoing it, then I have no problem with that. But yeah, like I think just shifting perception is just super important. Like if you go into a boxing session and you know that you're going to feel better after it, you know this is your thing, this is something that you've maybe grown up with. Um, you're going to feel better after it, as opposed to going into a boxing session and knowing you're about to get trashed and you're probably going to vomit afterwards.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people kind of enter, boxing classes, like, or, F45 or high intensity interval classes. They enter these classes knowing they're going to get smashed. They're probably going to throw up. I don't think that is going to have any benefits on, stress management. But like I said, if you shift your perception going into 45 minutes of boxing, then yeah, I don't think that is going to have a negative impact on your ability to manage stress at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that I've because it's a topic I wanted to so I can give a better service to the clients that I work with, and to help my better understanding of stress. And the thing that we've picked up on there, and what you keep mentioning, is that obviously how people perceive stress. And there was always I was the same opinion of you. If you want to go do boxing and you feel less stressed after that, that's winning. That's absolutely spot on. But there was always that in the back of my mind: is that going to actually make them a little bit more stressed? Because like you say, going into something a little bit that's going to be a little bit more demanding is actually putting a little bit of stress on their body. But exactly what you say, which I've never really thought about from that point of view, is how do they perceive that stress, and afterwards if they feel stress. Because I find it quite funny. There's usually two types of people. Two people that a type of person that'll want to do the breathing, the meditation, and then the other side that will want to knock hell out of a bag or something like that. Which, I mean, some people have done both, but that was just a question that for my own peace of mind on that. So covered quite a lot of varying topics on there. I've really enjoyed listening to that. I think I've learned some of my self there. For everyone listening who might want to follow the work that yourself and JPS Health and Fitness do, or if they want to get in touch with you or ask you any questions about the topics that we've covered today, where can people find you and see the content that you're putting out there?
Yeah, so best place to find me is probably Instagram, so MR Fitness with a double underscore. Also, JPS Education is the page that everyone who works in the fitness industry should probably be following. You can also follow JPS Health and Fitness, but if you're a coach, JPS Education is probably the way to go. At JPS, we also run a 12-week mentorship program, which is completely online and is accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world. So again, probably directed more towards coaches. But if you want to learn more about the evidence-based side of training in nutrition and literally everything that a coach needs to know, then the online mentorship program is probably the way to go. But yeah, in regards to myself, Instagram, and that's pretty much it, man.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Really enjoyed chatting with you. I hope everyone listening learned something from that. I know I did. And I think that was a really good topic to cover in terms of what I think is sometimes misunderstood, and people, sometimes put stress on the back burner a little bit and don't want to actually address it and work on it. So thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with Martin. 100% everyone listening, check out the work that Martin and JPS Health and Fitness do. They put some really great content out there. Thanks again. Thanks a lot for everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you.